It began on a chilly evening under the golden hues of a fading sunset. Four college friends, David, Emily, James, and Sarah, lounged on the cracked wooden benches near their dormitory, sharing tales and laughter. Nestled on the edge of a sleepy town, their university was abuzz with legends, the most famous of which was Baobab Hall, an abandoned building rumored to be cursed. "No one's brave enough to enter," James teased, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Maybe they are just smart," Sarah shot back, shivering despite herself. Emily rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "It's just a building. Ghosts aren't real," she declared. The others exchanged uneasy glances, but David's adventurous spirit ignited. "Why don't we find out for ourselves?" he challenged. The day was set. That night, the four of them made their way toward Baobab Hall, the moon's pale light casting long shadows across the overgrown path. The hall, a crumbling relic of colonial times, loomed before them, its broken windows glinting like jagged teeth. "Maybe we should. I don't know. Turn back," Sarah whispered, clutching James's arm. David led the way, pushing the rusted gate open with a groan that echoed in the stillness. Inside, the air felt heavier, as though the walls were holding their breath. The faint smell of mildew mixed with something sweeter, almost floral. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily muttered, stepping over a cracked tile. David, however, was transfixed by a faded painting above the staircase, depicting a woman with eyes that seemed to follow their every move. The friends stood frozen, the silence of the room suddenly oppressive. James's phone flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the peeling walls. Sarah stepped closer to a dusty table in the corner, her eyes catching a peculiar object, a small leather-bound book with frayed edges. "Guys, look at this," she whispered, picking it up. The air grew colder as she opened it, revealing pages filled with scribbled symbols and faded sketches. "This isn't just a diary. It's something else." David stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "Careful, Sarah. It might belong to someone, or something." His words sent a chill down their spines, but Sarah was too engrossed in the bizarre drawings to heed his warning. Each symbol seemed to pulse faintly, almost alive under the dim light. The tension in the room was palpable, and none of them noticed the faint creak of a floorboard behind them. As Sarah moved toward the boarded-up window, trying to peek outside, a faint whisper drifted through the room. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The group exchanged nervous glances, the hair on the back of their necks standing on end. The sound wasn't clear. It was a mix of words and an eerie hum, as though the walls themselves were speaking. "Let's get out of here," Emily suggested, her voice shaky. But as they turned toward the exit, the door slammed shut with a deafening thud. Panic set in, and James lunged at the handle, twisting it frantically. "It's locked." "It wasn't locked when we came in," he exclaimed, his voice rising. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, almost like a chant. Sarah clutched the book tighter, her face pale. "It's coming from the book," she said, her voice barely audible. "These symbols, they are not just drawings. They are spells or warnings." The group huddled together, their fear mounting. Whatever they had stumbled upon, it was far from ordinary. And now, there was no turning back. As the whispers intensified, the air seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. A strange fog began to seep into the room from the cracks in the walls, curling around their feet like ghostly tendrils. Emily screamed as a shadowy figure emerged in the corner, its form barely distinguishable but undeniably present. "Who's there?" David demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and bravado. The figure didn't respond but moved closer, its outline becoming clearer. It was tall, cloaked, and seemed to shimmer as though made of smoke and light. Sarah's grip on the book tightened. "It's protecting something," she whispered, her instincts telling her that the entity was tied to the mysterious tome. The figure raised an arm, and the whispers abruptly stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed against their eardrums. James stepped forward, his fists clenched. "What do you want from us?" he asked, trying to mask his fear. The figure tilted its head as if considering his question. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, it said, You were not meant to find this place. The group stood paralyzed as the entity's words echoed around them. Leave now, and you may yet be spared, it continued, its voice resonating with an otherworldly cadence. The fog thickened, and the room seemed to shrink around them. Sarah opened the book again, her fingers trembling. Wait, this book, it might explain what's happening, she said, frantically flipping through the pages. Sarah, are you crazy? We need to go, James shouted, tugging at her arm. But Sarah was transfixed by a page with a detailed drawing of the very figure standing before them. Beneath it were words written in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. The Keeper of Secrets. It's not trying to hurt us, Sarah said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. It's guarding something important, something we've disturbed. The figure seemed to react to her words, its form flickering as if acknowledging her insight. But what is it guarding? And why does it care about us? Emily asked, her voice trembling. The keeper raised its other arm, pointing toward the far wall. As they turned to look, the fog parted, revealing an ancient, ornate door embedded in the bricks. The choice is yours, it said before fading into the mist. The group stared at the door, their fear battling with curiosity. Whatever lay beyond it would change their lives forever. The ornate door loomed before them, its intricate carvings glowing faintly in the dim light. David reached out tentatively, running his fingers over the strange symbols etched into the wood. This is like nothing I've ever seen, he murmured. The carvings seemed to shift under his touch, as though alive. It feels warm, he added, pulling his hand back suddenly. Sarah stepped forward, still clutching the mysterious book. I think this door is connected to what's inside here, she said, flipping to a page with similar symbols. It's almost like a key. The group exchanged uneasy glances, torn between their growing curiosity and the palpable fear hanging in the air. If we open it, there's no telling what we'll find, James warned. Or what might happen. Sarah traced the symbols on the page, her fingers trembling. I think I know how to unlock it, she said hesitantly. But it's not just about opening the door. It's about intent. Her words hung heavily in the air, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. What do you mean? Emily asked, her voice tinged with frustration. This isn't just a door, Sarah explained. It's a barrier. And whatever is behind it, it's been sealed away for a reason. Her words sent a chill through the group. James stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then maybe it's best we leave it alone, he said. But Sarah shook her head. We've come this far. We can't turn back now. As Sarah began to recite the words written in the book, a faint light emanated from the door, growing brighter with each syllable. The carvings shimmered, and the air hummed with energy. The others watched in awe and terror as the door slowly began to shift. The fog around them thickened, and the room seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. Sarah, stop, David shouted, but it was too late. The door creaked open, revealing a shard of light piercing through the darkness beyond. The group shielded their eyes, the brilliance almost blinding. What is this? Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening hum. It's beautiful, but it feels wrong, James said, stepping back cautiously. The light dimmed slightly, revealing a vast, shadowy corridor stretching into the unknown. The walls were lined with strange, pulsating symbols, casting an eerie glow. The air was thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made their skin crawl. We shouldn't be here, James said, his voice trembling. But Sarah stepped forward, her determination unwavering. This place, it's calling to us, she said, her voice filled with wonder. There's something here we're meant to find. The others hesitated, their instincts screaming at them to turn back. But curiosity and fear held them in place, their hearts pounding as they took their first steps into the unknown. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Each step seemed to pull them deeper into the mystery, the air growing colder with every passing moment. Whatever lay ahead, they knew there was no turning back. The keeper's warning still echoed in their minds, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. The corridor stretched on, its walls thick with an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the light from their phones. The faint glow of the symbols on the walls pulsed gently, as though alive, leading them deeper into the unknown. Each step felt heavier, the weight of their decision pressing down on their shoulders. "This place doesn't feel right," Emily whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The others nodded, but none of them could bring themselves to turn back. The door had been unlocked, and the strange force pulling them forward was undeniable. As they moved further, the air grew colder. A thick fog began to swirl around their ankles, creeping along the floor like a living thing. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint sound of their breathing and the occasional creak of the ancient wood beneath their feet. Suddenly, Sarah stopped. Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Look," she said, pointing to the far end of the corridor. At the very end, a faint light glowed, dim but unmistakable. It seemed to beckon them forward, drawing them toward whatever lay beyond. David squinted into the distance. "What is that?" "A door," he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with both awe and fear. "But we have to see." Reluctantly, the group continued, each step bringing them closer to the mysterious light. As they approached, the air grew thicker, almost suffocating. The light flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls that twisted and danced in eerie patterns. When they reached the end of the corridor, they found that the light emanated from an ancient wooden door, unlike the one they had passed through. This door was ornate, carved with intricate symbols and figures that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of their eyes. James stepped forward, his hand hovering over the door handle. "This feels like the final step," he said, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. "But what's waiting for us on the other side?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened the book again, scanning its pages for any clue about the door before them. Her eyes flicked from page to page, her fingers trembling. Then, she stopped. "It's here," she whispered. "This door, it's called the gateway." "The gateway to what?" Emily asked, fear rising in her chest. Sarah looked up from the book, her face pale. "The gateway to the truth, to the things hidden from the world, and to the darkness that was locked away." David frowned. "But if it's locked away, why are we opening it?" "Because we have no choice," Sarah said quietly. "It called to us." With a deep breath, Sarah reached for the door handle, her hand steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. As her fingers closed around it, the door shuddered, as though awakening from a long slumber. With a creak that seemed to echo through the corridor, it swung open. A gust of cold wind rushed past them, carrying with it the scent of earth and something far more ancient. Something that seemed to vibrate with an energy they could feel deep in their bones. The room beyond was vast, larger than the entire building they had just left behind. It was lit by a strange, otherworldly glow that seemed to come from nowhere, bathing everything in an ethereal light. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with odd objects, books, jars of strange liquids, artifacts, and relics that none of them could identify. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols. And behind it, a figure stood, its back to them, cloaked in shadows. The figure seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness surrounding it. David's heart raced. Who is that?" he whispered. The figure did not answer. Instead, it slowly turned, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign, as though it had been pulled from the deepest recesses of their memories. It smiled, but the smile was empty, as if it belonged to something that had long since forgotten how to feel. "You have come," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, carrying with it a sense of power and authority. "You have opened the gateway." The friends stood frozen, staring at the figure in disbelief. What is this place?" James asked, his voice cracking with fear. "This is the place where all truths are kept," the figure said, stepping forward. "Where the secrets of the world, both dark and light, are preserved. And now, you have come to claim your own." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Claim our own," she repeated, confused. The figure nodded. Each of you, have a purpose here. You are the ones who will carry the truth forward. But be warned, the The path you now walk will not be easy. The truth comes at a price, and the price is more than you can imagine." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their fear mounting with every word the figure spoke. But despite the terror that gripped their hearts, they knew they could not turn back now. Sarah took a deep breath. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to overtake her. The figure gestured to the altar. "Place the book upon the stone. It holds the key to unlocking the truth." Sarah hesitated but then walked forward, holding the book tightly in her hands. As she approached the altar, the symbols on the stone seemed to glow brighter, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She placed the book carefully on the altar's surface, and immediately, the room seemed to tremble. The air crackled with energy, and a low hum filled the space. David, Emily, and James stepped back, watching in awe and fear as the room seemed to come alive. The figure raised its arms, and the hum grew louder, its intensity building until it was deafening. The symbols on the altar shifted, swirling together into a single, glowing shape. And then, with a final, resonant sound, the energy exploded outward, filling the room with blinding light. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the friends stumbled, trying to stay on their feet. When the light finally faded, the figure was gone. The altar was empty, and the room was silent once more. But the book was still on the stone, its pages now blank. Did we do it?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. Sarah stepped forward, her hand trembling as she picked up the book. "I think we've only just begun." As Sarah held the book, its blank pages stared back at her, offering no answers, only silence. She turned it over, inspecting every inch of its cover, but it remained unchanged. The faint hum in the room had stopped, but the air still felt charged, as though something had been set in motion that they could not yet comprehend. "What now?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "What does this mean? Why are the pages blank?" "I don't know," Sarah said softly, "but I think we've triggered something. Something big." David stepped forward, eyeing the now empty altar with unease. "This feels like a trap," he said. "We came here expecting answers, but all we've got is a book with no pages." Just as he spoke, a low rumble echoed through the walls. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, causing them all to stumble. A new light appeared, flickering in the far corner of the room, and it cast eerie shadows on the walls. Sarah instinctively clutched the book tighter, as if the object itself could protect them. "Look," James said, pointing. "The light. It's coming from the other side." They all turned to face the source of the light. It was coming from a small crack in the wall, no bigger than a hand. The light pulsed from within, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythmic pattern, as though something inside the wall was trying to communicate with them. "Do we go to it?" Emily asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. "I think we have no choice," Sarah replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "We came for answers, and it seems like this is the next step." With a mix of hesitation and resolve, they made their way toward the crack in the wall. As they approached, the pulsing light grew stronger, filling the room with an unsettling glow. Sarah reached out and placed her hand on the crack, feeling a strange vibration under her fingertips. The wall seemed to respond, shifting slightly, as if the crack were alive. Suddenly, the crack widened, and the wall parted slowly, revealing a narrow passage beyond. The light now flooded the room, spilling out from the opening like liquid. They exchanged nervous glances but knew they had no choice but to move forward. The passage was narrow, with walls that seemed to close in on them as they walked. The air was thick with a strange, musty scent, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps as they advanced. At the end of the passage, they arrived at a large, open chamber, and what they saw inside stopped them in their tracks. The chamber was massive, its ceiling lost in shadow, and it was filled with towering stone statues, each one intricately carved and lifelike. The statues were of beings they had never seen before, tall, with long limbs and sharp features, their eyes set with glowing gems that seemed to watch them, unblinking. In the center of the chamber stood an ancient throne, made of black stone, upon which rested a glowing orb. The orb pulsed with an eerie light, casting strange shadows across the room. It seemed to hum with energy, its power filling the space. "This is it," Sarah whispered. "This is what we were meant to find." They approached cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The closer they got to the orb, the stronger the pull became, as if it were calling to them, beckoning them to come closer. As they neared it, the temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive force. David took a step back, a nervous look on his face. "I don't know if this is a good idea." "We have to," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "We need to understand what's happening. We have to touch it." With trembling hands, Sarah reached forward, her fingers brushing against the surface of the orb. The instant her skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, overwhelming her senses. Her vision blurred, and the room around her seemed to distort. For a moment, she felt as though she were being pulled into the orb, as if it were consuming her very essence. Then, as quickly as it had started, the sensation stopped. Sarah stumbled back, gasping for air. The orb was now completely still, its glow dimming to a soft, steady pulse. "Sarah!" Emily cried, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" I don't know," Sarah whispered, still shaken. It felt like I was somewhere else. Somewhere beyond this world." David's eyes widened with realization. "That's it," he said. "This is the gateway. It wasn't just a door, it's a portal to something else." Sarah nodded, still trying to regain her composure. "I think we've just opened a door to a whole new world. One we're not ready for." As the group stood in stunned silence, the statues around them seemed to shift. The air in the room grew colder, and a low rumbling sound echoed from deep within the chamber. "Is this happening again?" James asked, his voice tight with panic. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said urgently. "This isn't over. I think we've just set something in motion we can't stop." They turned to leave, but as they did, the ground shook violently beneath their feet. A dark shadow seemed to move across the chamber, growing larger and more ominous with each passing second. A voice, low and resonant, whispered from the darkness, its words vibrating through the air. "You have awakened, Mir." The friends froze, their blood running cold as the figure in the shadows began to emerge. The figure emerged from the shadows, its form towering and indistinct at first, like a silhouette made of darkness itself. As it stepped forward, the air grew heavier, the pressure almost unbearable. The glowing statues lining the chamber seemed to react to its presence, their eyes flickering as though alive, watching with an intensity that felt suffocating. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. Her heart raced, but she refused to back down. This was the moment they had been heading toward since they first entered the ruins. The figure's eyes, brilliant and piercing, glowed with an ethereal light. "I am the guardian of the gateway," it said, its voice deep and resonant, echoing off the stone walls. "You have awakened that which should remain hidden. You have crossed the threshold." Emily stepped back, gripping Sarah's arm in fear. "What does that mean? What is this place?" The guardian's form rippled, becoming clearer. It was humanoid, but with features that seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like it was not entirely part of this world. "This is the threshold," the guardian explained. "A place between realms. A gate that connects all worlds, all realities. You have unlocked it. Now, you must face the consequences." David's heart pounded. "We didn't know. We didn't mean to." The guardian tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Ignorance does not absolve you. The path you have chosen will lead to a reckoning. This place is not meant for the unworthy." "Unworthy?" James echoed, taking a step forward, his fists clenched. "We didn't ask for any of this. We're just trying to understand." "Understanding comes at a price," the guardian replied. "The truth you seek cannot be given freely. You will have to prove your worth if you wish to leave with your lives intact." The group exchanged tense glances, the weight of the guardian's words settling over them. They had come this far, and now they were being asked to face something far greater than anything they had imagined. "What do we have to do?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The guardian raised its hand, and the walls of the chamber seemed to ripple, shifting like the surface of a pool disturbed by a stone. Symbols, ancient and glowing, appeared in the air between them. "You must answer a question," it said. "A question of destiny." The symbols shifted, forming words that floated before them. "What is the price of truth?" The room seemed to hold its breath as the guardian regarded her with an intensity that felt like it was piercing into her soul. The symbols flickered and shifted again, this time forming an intricate pattern. "You have answered correctly," the guardian said, its voice almost approving. "But the journey is not over. The truth you seek is far from simple. It is hidden in the layers of this world, and in those beyond it." The guardian extended its hand toward the glowing orb on the throne. As it touched the orb, a wave of energy surged through the room, and the orb flared to life, its light blinding. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the air hummed with a powerful force. "You must now decide," the guardian continued. "Will you walk through the gateway and uncover the truths of the realms? Or will you leave this place and abandon the path you have begun?" For a long moment, silence reigned. The friends stood frozen, their minds racing with the weight of the decision they now faced. They had come here to find answers, but the answers were not without a cost. Sarah's thoughts whirled. She knew they couldn't turn back now, not after everything they had experienced. They had already unlocked the gateway. There was no going back, not really. The only way forward was to confront the unknown, to walk through the gateway and face whatever awaited them. "I choose to face it," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We came here for the truth. We'll find it, no matter what it costs." David, James, Emily, and the others exchanged uncertain glances. But one by one, they nodded in agreement. They had come this far together, and they would not turn back now. The guardian's eyes softened, and the air around them seemed to still. "Then you are ready," it said. "Step forward and embrace the truth that awaits you." The friends moved together, stepping toward the orb at the center of the chamber. As they approached, the light from the orb enveloped them, swirling around them like a whirlwind of energy. They braced themselves, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The orb pulsed with a bright, almost blinding light, and the world around them seemed to blur and fade away. The walls of the chamber melted, and the floor beneath their feet dissolved into nothingness. It was as though they were floating, suspended in some vast, infinite space, the only thing tangible being the glowing light of the orb that seemed to surround them. "Is this it?" Emily whispered, her voice lost in the vastness of the void. "Is this where we find the truth?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the strange sensation of disorientation. "But we have no choice now. We have to keep moving forward." As they stepped closer to the orb, the light intensified, and the world around them began to take shape once again. They found themselves standing in a new place, one that was simultaneously familiar and alien. The ground beneath their feet was soft and green, like grass, but the sky above was an eerie shade of purple, swirling with strange clouds. The air smelled of something sweet and unfamiliar. "This isn't the same place," David said, looking around in awe and confusion. "Where are we?" "It's not a place," the voice of the guardian echoed, reverberating through the air. "This is a crossroads, a realm between worlds. You are standing at the threshold of all that was, all that is, and all that will be." The friends exchanged glances, the enormity of the situation beginning to settle in. They had stepped through the gateway, but what awaited them now? What truths would they have to confront? "You must now choose," the guardian's voice continued, seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Each of you will face a trial, a personal test that will determine whether you are truly worthy of the truth you seek. If you succeed, you will gain knowledge beyond your understanding. If you fail, you will be lost forever." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she realized the weight of what the guardian had just said. This was no longer about finding answers. It was about survival. "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Whatever the trial is, We'll face it together. The ground shifted beneath them, and suddenly, the world around them began to dissolve again, morphing into a new, stark landscape. It was a barren, desolate wasteland, the sky overcast with dark, swirling clouds that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. Before them stood a massive stone door, ancient and weathered, adorned with intricate symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "This is it," James said, his voice tight with tension. "The first trial." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. "We have to pass through the door," she said. "We have no other choice." As they approached, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a vast, empty space beyond. The air felt heavier here, thick with the weight of something unseen. The door swung open with a sound that echoed like a tolling bell, and one by one, the group stepped through. The moment they crossed the threshold, they were separated. Sarah felt herself pulled into darkness, a vast, unending void where she could hear only the beating of her own heart. She reached out, her hands grasping at the nothingness, but there was no light, no ground beneath her feet. It was as if she was suspended in an endless sea of darkness. Then, a voice broke through the silence, a familiar voice, yet strange. "Sarah," it whispered, soft and haunting. Her heart skipped a beat. "Who's there?" she called out into the blackness, her voice echoing back at her. "Do you remember?" the voice asked, a low, almost melodic tone. "Do you remember the choices you've made, the paths you've taken? Do you remember what it cost you?" A cold shiver ran through Sarah. She knew that voice. It was her own. The void around her shifted, and suddenly, memories began to flood her mind, fragments of her past, both painful and joyful. Faces she hadn't seen in years. Moments she had long buried deep within her. She saw herself as a child, playing with her younger brother, laughing as they ran through the fields. She saw her family, her parents, standing together in a warm embrace. Then, the images twisted, darkened, and shifted. She saw the moments she had tried to forget, the arguments, the regrets, the moments of weakness that had shaped her. "These are your choices," the voice whispered again. "The path you have walked, the people you have hurt, the truths you've hidden from yourself. Now, you must confront them." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She knew what she had to do. The trial was not just about confronting the past. It was about accepting it, embracing it, and finding the strength to move forward. "Yes," she whispered into the darkness. "I remember. I accept them. All of them." The moment the words left her lips, the darkness around her began to dissolve. The air cleared, and the familiar sights of her childhood home appeared before her, bathed in the warm glow of sunlight. The weight on her chest lifted, and she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. The voice spoke again, softer this time. "You have passed the first trial, Sarah. Now, you must continue." The world shifted once more, and Sarah was pulled back into the vast landscape of the crossroads. Her friends were there, standing just ahead, their faces filled with uncertainty and fear, yet there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, rushing to Sarah's side. "I'm fine," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I passed the trial." The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and a new door appeared before them, this one glowing with an eerie blue light. "Each of you must face your own trial," the guardian's voice echoed again. "Only together will you succeed. Only together will you uncover the final truth." The friends shared a determined look. They had come this far, and they would face whatever came next, together. The friends stood before the glowing blue door, their hearts pounding with the knowledge that each one of them would soon have to face their own trial. The air felt charged with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was watching them, waiting for their next move. "We're ready," David said, his voice a mix of resolve and fear. He looked at the door, then back at the others. "We've made it this far. We can't stop now." One by one, they stepped forward, and as soon as they crossed the threshold, they were immediately separated again. The world around them dissolved into darkness, and they were plunged into isolation, each alone in their own space. Sarah's heart raced. The room she found herself in was vast, cold, and empty, the walls stretching far beyond what her eyes could see. A single light flickered in the distance, and instinctively, she began walking toward it. The silence around her was oppressive, almost suffocating. Then, the voice returned. "Sarah." She froze. It was her voice again, but it sounded distant, as if coming from another version of herself. "Sarah," it repeated, and this time, she could hear the sadness in its tone. "Do you remember the promise you made?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The promise. She remembered it now, a promise she had made to herself long ago, a vow to never turn back, no matter what. A promise that had shaped the choices she had made in the years that followed. "You promised," the voice continued, "but you broke that promise, didn't you?" Sarah's heart clenched. She remembered now, the way she had abandoned her dreams, the way she had given up on everything she once held dear. The weight of regret pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No, I didn't break it. I just changed." But the voice didn't respond. Instead, the light in the distance grew brighter, and Sarah felt herself drawn toward it, like a moth to a flame. She walked faster, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. With each step, the weight of her past mistakes seemed to lift, but the sense of guilt never truly faded. When she reached the light, it exploded into brilliance, surrounding her in warmth and radiance. Her memories, her choices, and her regrets all swirled around her like a vortex, but this time, she didn't resist them. She embraced them. She accepted that her path had been filled with mistakes, but those mistakes had also shaped her into who she was now. The light dimmed, and Sarah found herself back at the crossroads, standing before her friends. Their expressions were filled with concern, but there was a silent understanding between them. "Sarah," Emily said gently, "what happened?" "I faced my trial," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she had ever felt. "I confronted the promises I made to myself, the ones I broke, and the ones I kept. I came to terms with them. And now, I'm ready for whatever comes next." David nodded, stepping forward. "It's my turn." Without waiting for a response, he stepped through the next glowing door, his face a mask of determination. The moment he crossed the threshold, he too was separated from the group, plunged into a vast, endless darkness. David's world was different from Sarah's. He found himself standing in the middle of a dense forest, the trees towering high above him, their branches twisting into strange shapes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the silence around him. "David," a voice called, soft but clear. "Do you remember?" David's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the voice immediately. It was the voice of his younger brother, Thomas, someone he hadn't seen in years. Someone he had left behind. "Thomas," David whispered, his voice breaking. "Where are you? What's happening?" The rustling of leaves grew louder, and through the trees, David saw a figure moving toward him. As the figure emerged from the shadows, David's breath caught in his throat. It was Thomas, only he didn't look like the brother David remembered. The boy in front of him was older, his face shadowed with sorrow. His eyes, once bright with curiosity and life, now seemed hollow, empty. "You left me," Thomas said, his voice low and hollow. "You abandoned me when I needed you the most. Do you remember?" David's chest tightened. He had left Thomas behind, not by choice, but out of necessity. He had been consumed by his own ambitions, his own fears, and he had left his brother to fend for himself. "I didn't want to," David pleaded, stepping forward. "But I had to. I had dreams. I had to move on." Thomas's eyes darkened. "You abandoned me for your dreams, David. And now, What do you have to show for it? What did it cost you? David's legs felt weak beneath him, and he collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of the guilt and regret that had plagued him for years. He had tried to convince himself that he had made the right choice, but deep down, he had always known that he had hurt his brother in ways he couldn't undo. You can't undo the past, the voice of Thomas said, almost a whisper. But you can make peace with it. You can choose to move forward. You can choose to be better. David closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the full extent of his guilt. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't try to justify it. He just felt it, and in that moment, he realized something. He could choose to be better. He could learn from the mistakes of the past and move forward. When he opened his eyes, Thomas was gone, and the forest around him had vanished. He was standing back at the crossroads, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "David," Emily said softly. "Are you okay?" David nodded, his voice steady now. "I passed the trial. I've made peace with my past." The group gathered together once more, and the world around them shifted again. They knew the trials were far from over, but they also knew that they were growing stronger with each one they faced. Together, they would uncover the truth. Together, they would face whatever came next. The group stood together, a quiet strength radiating from them as they prepared for whatever came next. The trials they had faced so far had tested their resolve, but they had emerged stronger, more aware of their flaws and the lessons they had to learn. They knew they had only just begun their journey. Emily stepped forward, her heart pounding with anticipation. "It's my turn now," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt inside. Without hesitation, she walked towards the next glowing door, the cool light enveloping her as she stepped through. In an instant, she was no longer with her friends. The world around her shifted, and she found herself standing in a familiar place, a place she hadn't seen in years, her childhood home. The air smelled of the old wooden floors and the faint scent of baking from the kitchen, a memory she had long buried. She looked around, her chest tightening as the reality of her surroundings sank in. This was the house she had grown up in, but it was different. It was as though time had stood still, the walls frozen in a moment from her past. "Emily," a voice called, and she froze. It was her mother's voice, clear and warm, like it used to be. Emily turned, her heart racing. She hadn't heard her mother's voice in years, since that day, that moment when everything had changed. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. She took a hesitant step forward, her feet moving on their own. The figure before her was not just a memory. It was her mother, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, smiling as though nothing had ever gone wrong. Her mother's smile faded as she saw Emily's face. "You've changed, Emily. You've become someone I hardly recognize. What happened to the little girl who used to dream so big? The girl who promised she would never let fear stop her?" Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She remembered the promises she had made to herself, the goals she had set, and the person she had once aspired to be. But somewhere along the way, life had chipped away at those dreams. She had let fear, doubt, and failure define her. She had given up on herself in ways she could never fully forgive. "Mom, Emily began, but her voice faltered. The weight of guilt and regret threatened to overwhelm her. "You've let fear control you, haven't you?" her mother asked, her voice gentle but firm. "You've stopped believing in yourself, stopped believing that you are capable of so much more." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I wanted to be brave, but I got scared. I didn't know how to keep going." Her mother reached out, taking Emily's hand in hers. "Fear is a part of life, Emily. But it doesn't have to control you. You have the strength to face it, to push through the doubt and the fear. You've always had it. You just need to remember who you truly are." In that moment, something inside Emily shifted. The doubts, the insecurities, the fear that had held her back for so long, they all began to dissolve. She could see the truth of her mother's words now. She had the strength to move forward. She had always had it. "I'm ready," Emily said, her voice stronger now, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm ready to be who I was meant to be." Her mother smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. "You always were, Emily. You just needed to remember." With that, the world around her faded, and Emily found herself back with her friends. The crossroads loomed before them, but this time, they weren't just standing there. They were standing taller, their resolve unshaken. They had each faced their fears, their pasts, and their regrets, and they had emerged victorious. "Emily," Sarah said, stepping forward. "How did it go?" Emily looked at her friends, her heart full. "I faced my fear, the fear of never being enough. I learned that it doesn't define me. I'm ready for whatever comes next." David nodded in agreement. "We're all ready." Together, they stood, side by side, knowing that each trial was a stepping stone on the path to something greater. The trials were not just about discovering the truth. They were about discovering themselves, finding the strength, courage, and resilience they needed to face what awaited them. The glowing door before them flickered one final time, and they stepped through together, ready for the next chapter of their journey. The answers they sought were still out there, waiting for them, but they no longer feared what lay ahead. Together, they could face anything. As they stepped through the door, the group found themselves standing in a vast, open space. It was unlike anything they had encountered before, a surreal landscape of shifting colors and unearthly light, where the sky above was a cascade of vibrant hues, constantly changing in an ever-flowing dance. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with energy, and the air buzzed with an electric hum, almost as if the world itself was alive, breathing with them. "This place," Sarah whispered, her voice reverberating in the strange atmosphere. "It doesn't feel real." "No," David replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But it is. Whatever this is, it's part of the journey." The group exchanged wary glances, but there was no turning back now. Each step forward felt like a leap into the unknown, but they pressed on, driven by a shared determination. Their bond had grown stronger with each challenge, each fear they had conquered, and the uncertainty ahead no longer seemed as daunting. As they walked, the shifting landscape began to reveal strange, towering structures in the distance. They were made of materials they couldn't identify, shifting and changing shapes as they moved. Some appeared solid for a moment before dissolving into mist, while others stretched into the sky like twisted spires of light. "What is this place?" Emily murmured, feeling the weight of their mission pressing heavily on her chest. The question that had driven them all forward since the beginning remained unanswered. What were they truly seeking here? "Whatever it is, we're getting closer," Sarah said, her eyes narrowed in focus. She could sense it too, the feeling that they were nearing the end of a long and winding path, where the answers they sought would finally come into view. A figure appeared ahead of them, standing at the base of one of the tallest structures. It was a silhouette at first, obscured by the constantly shifting light. But as they approached, the figure became clearer, an older man, his features serene but ancient, as if time itself had passed through him without leaving a mark. He raised a hand in greeting as they drew nearer, and his voice, when it came, was deep and resonant, echoing across the landscape. "You have come far," he said, his words carrying a weight that seemed to settle in their bones. "But the greatest test is yet to come." The group stopped, their collective breath held. The man's presence was imposing, yet there was a calmness about him, a knowing that was both comforting and unnerving. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. The man smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "This world is a reflection of what lies within each of you. The trials you have faced have not just been tests of courage and strength, they have been tests of understanding. The answers you seek do not lie outside of you. They lie within." David took a step forward. "What are you asking us to do?" "To face yourselves once more," the man replied. "You have come to the end of your journey through the unknown, but now you must confront your greatest fears and desires, not as individuals, but as a collective. Only together can you find the true path forward." The group exchanged uncertain glances. They had been tested individually, each of them forced to confront their own struggles, but now they had to do so as a group. They had to work together, face the depths of their inner selves, and uncover what had brought them here in the first place. "The path you seek is not one of power or knowledge," the man continued. "It is a path of understanding, of recognizing your true potential and the interconnectedness of all things. Only when you see yourselves clearly, and each other, will the truth be revealed." The air seemed to grow heavier with the weight of his words. Emily could feel the intensity of the moment. This was no longer about solving a puzzle or finding an object. This was about something deeper, something intrinsic to their very beings. "Are we ready for this?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at her friends, who had become so much more than companions on this journey. They were her family now, bound together by experiences, by fears, and by victories. "Whatever happens, we do this together," David said, his voice full of conviction. The others nodded in agreement. The man's eyes softened. "Then you are ready. Step forward, and let your journey truly begin." With those final words, the landscape shifted once again. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the structures around them blurred and reformed. A blinding light enveloped them, and they were pulled into it, their minds swirling with images, sounds, and sensations beyond comprehension. For a moment, everything was silent, and then the world around them reformed once more. The light faded, revealing a new space entirely, one that felt familiar and yet alien. A place where their thoughts and actions seemed to echo in the air, where everything was connected. The journey had only just begun, but they knew one thing for certain. They were no longer the same people who had entered that first door. The answers they had sought, and the truths they had uncovered, had forever changed them. Now, they would face the final test, the one that would reveal their true purpose and the path that lay ahead. Whatever came next, they were ready. The group stood together, heartbeats synchronizing with the strange rhythm of this new place, their senses heightened. The air buzzed with anticipation, the silence almost oppressive. They had crossed countless thresholds and faced down uncountable challenges, but the final one awaited them. This place, Sarah breathed, her eyes scanning the landscape. It felt like a realm untouched by time, where every breath seemed to carry the weight of eternity. "It feels like it's both everywhere and nowhere at once." David nodded, still processing the enormity of the space. "It's like the world is suspended. Nothing feels grounded." The man they had encountered earlier stood before them now, his form clearer in the light of this strange new world. "This is the realm of understanding," he explained, his voice calm, yet carrying the power of ancient wisdom. "Here, you will confront not only your past, but the very essence of who you are. Only when you understand this, your true self, will you know the way forward." The walls of the realm rippled around them, and images began to form in the air. They were flashes, fragments of memories and emotions, fears, desires, regrets, and longings, all tangled together in a swirling web of light and shadow. Each one reflected a different aspect of who they were, of their journey, and the things that had shaped them. "This is," Emily's voice trembled. "It's showing us our truths. All of it. The things we've hidden, the things we're afraid to face." "Exactly," the man affirmed, his gaze never leaving them. "But do not fear. These are not meant to hurt you. They are the pieces of your soul, fragments that you must reconcile to move forward." The images intensified. Each of them saw flashes of their past lives, moments that had defined them, their triumphs, their failures, their moments of weakness. Emily saw herself, as a child, standing alone in the schoolyard, afraid to speak to anyone. David was reliving his struggles with self-doubt, the moments when he'd felt he wasn't enough. Sarah was facing her fear of abandonment, seeing herself alone in an empty room, reaching out to no one. And then there was James, reliving a crucial moment in his life where he had been forced to choose between what was right and what was easy. Each of them gasped as the images collided with their deepest emotions. There were no more walls, no more hiding. They could feel the weight of the decisions, the heartache, the love, and the loss that had shaped them into who they were. And yet, they also felt something else, a sense of acceptance, of understanding. This is part of the process. The man's voice echoed again, steady and soothing. You must accept everything you see, for it is all part of who you are. Only when you embrace it all, your mistakes, your triumphs, your darkest secrets, will you be free to walk the path ahead. David closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. I've spent so much of my life trying to escape these feelings. But maybe it's time to face them. James nodded. We all have pieces of ourselves we've ignored or been afraid of. But this is our chance to heal. The images shifted again, and this time, the light around them began to take on a soft, golden hue. They felt lighter, the weight of their pasts lifting from their shoulders as the realm seemed to recognize their acceptance. The air was no longer filled with tension. It had transformed into something gentle, almost nurturing. The energy felt like a warm embrace, comforting them after the trials they had endured. You have passed the first test, the man said, stepping closer. But now, you must choose the path forward. The truth you sought lies ahead, but only you can decide whether you are ready to accept it. The space around them began to change, slowly revealing two distinct paths. One path was bathed in light, glowing with a soft radiance that beckoned them forward. The other path was shrouded in mist, a sense of mystery and uncertainty hanging heavily in the air. Both paths stretched into the distance, winding and unknown, but each felt entirely different. What do we do now? Emily asked, her voice calm yet heavy with the weight of the decision before them. This is your final choice, the man explained. The path of light offers clarity, certainty, and resolution. It is the path of understanding, of knowing what is true. But the path of mist is the path of discovery, of stepping into the unknown and seeking new truths. Both paths are valid, and both will lead you to your destiny. The question is, which one will you choose? The group looked at each other, the gravity of the decision clear in their eyes. They had come so far, faced so many challenges, but this final choice was unlike any other. It was not a question of fear or strength. It was a question of trust. Sarah was the first to speak. I've always chosen the path of certainty. I've always wanted to know the answer before taking the step. But maybe the unknown isn't something to fear. Maybe it's something to embrace. David nodded. We've already walked through the unknown this far. We don't have to know everything. We can trust ourselves to face whatever comes next. James stepped forward. I agree. We've faced our pasts. We've learned from them. Now, it's time to embrace the future, whatever it holds. The man smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. Then the path of mist is yours. As they stepped forward together, the mists began to swirl around them, soft and inviting. The golden light from the other path faded, but the warmth of their shared decision filled the air around them. They had chosen uncertainty. They had chosen to step into the unknown together, trusting in each other and the journey ahead. And as the mist enveloped them completely, they felt a sense of peace, a peace that told them they had made the right choice. The answers they sought were no longer waiting for them at the end of a path. They were within them all along, and the journey to understand them was only just beginning. The mist thickened around them, wrapping them in its cool embrace, yet instead of fear, they felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if the uncertainty was no longer something to dread but something to explore, to experience with open hearts. They walked together, the path beneath their feet shifting as they moved, ever-changing, just like their journey. The air around them pulsed with a soft, almost imperceptible hum, as though the world itself was alive, responding to their presence. "Do you feel that?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper, yet full of awe. "It's like the air is speaking to us." David nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. "It's like the world is alive with possibilities. Everything feels connected, like we're not just walking through this place, we're becoming part of it." Kofi looked around, sensing the same energy. This is the realm of discovery, where the past has been faced, but the future is still waiting to unfold. "We're not alone here. We never were." The mist parted briefly, revealing a faint silhouette in the distance. It was a figure, standing tall and still, as if waiting for them. Their features were indistinct at first, but as they drew closer, the figure began to take shape, a person, but not someone they had ever seen before. The figure was cloaked in a robe of shifting colors, blending with the mist and the light around them. It was as if the figure belonged to this realm, part of the fabric of the unknown. The figure spoke, its voice a soft echo, like a whisper carried by the wind. "You have chosen the path of discovery. Now, the question is, what do you seek?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady but curious. "We seek to understand, to know who we are, and what comes next. We've walked through our past, but now, we want to know what lies ahead." The figure nodded slowly, as if considering their words. "The future is not something that can be given to you. It must be discovered, piece by piece, through your actions, your choices, and your understanding of yourselves." The mist swirled again, and this time, it began to form images, visions of the future. They were not clear, concrete images, but rather impressions, glimpses of what could be. They were moments of joy, of triumph, but also moments of struggle and uncertainty. The future was a tapestry, constantly shifting and changing, shaped by every decision they made. David felt his heart race. Is this what we're meant to see? The future. The figure tilted their head, the robe shimmering in the light. "These are possibilities, not certainties. The future is not fixed. It is malleable, shaped by the choices you make. What you see here is not a prophecy. It is a reflection of what could be, but it is still in your hands." Sarah's mind raced as she saw flashes of herself, standing on a stage, speaking to a crowd, her voice strong and confident. Could this be me? Leading others, making a difference. Kofi stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched his own future unfold before him. I see myself, traveling, learning, meeting new people. But there's also a darkness, a challenge I must face." "I see something too," Emily said, her voice soft but determined. "I see myself surrounded by those I care about, but there's a decision, a choice that will change everything." The figure spoke again, their voice full of ancient wisdom. "You are all seeing fragments of what could be. These glimpses are not meant to give you answers, but to help you understand that the future is not a destination. It is a journey that you must walk with awareness, with intention." The mists began to settle around them, and the figures started to fade, their presence becoming less distinct, like a fading memory. "Your path is yours to choose. Walk it with courage. The unknown is not something to fear. It is the canvas upon which your lives will be painted. The future is shaped by your choices, your willingness to embrace both the light and the darkness, the joy and the struggle. The journey is yours to make." And with that, the figure vanished, leaving only the soft hum of the mist and the quiet rustling of the world around them. The path ahead was now completely open, stretching far into the distance, full of unknowns and possibilities. But in that moment, they realized something profound. They no longer felt lost. The uncertainty was not something to fear, it was something to embrace. "We have the power to shape our own futures," David said, his voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "It's up to us." Kofi smiled, nodding in agreement. Yes, the unknown is not a wall, it's an open field. We decide where we go from here. Emily looked at her friends, her eyes shining with hope. We've faced our pasts. Now, we step into the future. Together. And as they moved forward, the mist parted for them, not as a barrier but as an invitation. The world ahead was not a place of certainty, but a vast, open expanse waiting to be discovered. They knew that whatever came next, they would face it with courage, with each other by their side. The future was theirs to explore, one step at a time.